September 1943, southern Italy. The German army believed the land itself was on their side. Mountains rose like walls. Narrow valleys choked any large advance. Winding roads forced enemies into predictable paths. This terrain was perfect for defense, and guarding it was one of Germany's most trusted formations at the 16th Panzer Division. Veteran tank crews, battle-hardened infantry, officers who had survived Poland, France, and the Eastern Front. They had seen everything war could offer, or so they thought. From a high observation point, a German general scanned the valley below through his binoculars. His face was calm, his posture confident. Below him, his division was spread with precision. Tanks concealed along ridge lines, infantry dug into stone-lined trenches, supply trucks positioned safely to the rear, radio units fully operational. Everything was exactly where doctrine demanded. There was no sign of danger, no artillery fire, no aircraft engines, no movement in the distance, just silence. And in war, silence is rarely comforting. The general had commanded men for more than a decade. He trusted experience more than maps or reports. And something felt wrong. The air was too still. The enemy was too quiet. He turned to a radio officer. "Any movement?" The reply came instantly. "Greater than negative, sir. Enemy activity minimal." The general nodded slowly. If the enemy wasn't attacking a broken bar, then they were preparing something worse. Down in the valley, soldiers cleaned weapons. Tank crews smoked cigarettes beside armored hulls. Some even joked quietly. They believed they were safe. After all, every major attack followed patterns. Artillery softened defenses, aircraft struck supply lines, tanks rolled in behind explosions. You heard war coming, but that die broken bar. War made no sound. Normally, air attacks announced themselves from kilometers away, but the sky above the 16th Panzer Division was perfectly clear. No contrails, no engine noise, no shadows crossing the ground. The general raised his binoculars again. Nothing. That was when he said quietly, "Greater than, keep everyone alert." "I don't like this." Time passed slowly. Then suddenly a brief flash of light erupted deep in the valley. No explosion followed. No thunder, just light. A junior officer froze. "Sir, a broken bar, did you see that?" The general did not answer. His eyes never left the valley. Without warning, men began screaming, not from shrapnel, not from bullets, from fire. Tanks started to glow red hot. Steel plates blistered. Rubber wheels melted in seconds. Soldiers dropped rifles, clawing at their uniforms as flames raced across their bodies. But there was no visible source, no shells landing, no fuel igniting, just fire. Invisible, relentless, everywhere. The radios exploded with overlapping voices. "Greater than, we're burning." "Greater than, no incoming fire detected." "Greater than, we can't locate the enemy." "Greater than, fire is spreading through the positions." The general felt his stomach tighten. This was impossible. Artillery created craters. Bombs left debris. Flamethrowers had operators. But this fire had no origin, no direction, no enemy. Men tried to flee. Some ran downhill. Others climbed desperately toward the ridges. It made no difference. The fire followed them, not like flames, like heat itself had turned hostile. The general whispered words no commander wanted to admit. "Greater than, we were never trained for this." "Disperse the units, abandon vehicles, move out of the valley." Orders poured through the radio network, but panic spreads faster than commands. Engines wouldn't start, steel was too hot to touch, ammunition cooked off inside tanks, killing crews instantly. Within minutes, discipline collapsed. Veterans screamed like recruits. From his observation point, the general watched his division die, not slowly, not gloriously, but helplessly. Entire platoons vanished behind curtains of heat. Tanks became burning coffins. Supply trucks exploded one after another. And still no enemy was visible. No guns fired back. This was not a battle. It was an execution. The Allies had unleashed something new, a form of warfare that ignored cover, armor, and experience. A weapon that killed without being seen. The general lowered his binoculars. His division, a 1,000 strong, was effectively gone in less than 20 minutes. Later, survivors would struggle to explain what happened. Reports would describe sudden combustion, unexplained firestorms, heat without explosions. Historians would give it the name invisible fire. But for the men who lived through it, a broken bar, it was simply hell. When the fire finally died down, silence returned to the valley. But it was not the same silence as before. This silence was heavy, permanent, filled with the smell of burned metal and flesh. What had once been the proud 16th Panzer Division was now scattered wreckage, twisted tanks, charred trucks, and bodies frozen where they had fallen. No trenches mattered. No armor had protected them. The battlefield looked as if the earth itself had turned against the men standing on it. A handful of German soldiers survived. Some were badly burned. Others were in shock, unable to speak. When questioned later, their stories sounded unreal. They all said the same thing. Greater than there were no shells, greater than there were no planes, greater than this fire just appeared. Medical officers were confused. Burns usually followed explosions or fuel fires. These burns did not. Skin was scorched without shrapnel wounds. Lungs were damaged without smoke inhalation. It was as if the air itself had attacked them. The general was summoned for questioning almost immediately. In work, losing an entire division was unacceptable. Doing so without firing back was unforgivable. Inside a dimly lit command room, senior officers demanded explanations. What enemy units did you engage? What weapons were used against you? Why was there no counterattack? The general answered honestly, "Greater than I never saw the enemy." The room went quiet. One officer slammed his fist on the table. "Greater than impossible. Every weapon has a source." The general did not argue. He had already learned something terrifying. They were fighting a war they no longer understood. While the Germans searched for answers, the Allies already had them. What destroyed the 16th Panzer Division was not magic, it was science. Months earlier, Allied engineers had tested a new battlefield concept. A concentrated firestorm, created not by a single bomb, but by perfectly timed saturation strikes. The goal was simple: remove the enemy's ability to react. The weapon was not invisible in a literal sense, it was invisible to expectation. Instead of loud, isolated explosions, the Allies used rapid sequential detonations, heat-focused blast patterns, precision targeting of enclosed terrain. The valley trapped heat. Each explosion fed the next. Air pressure collapsed inward, then ignited. Oxygen itself became fuel. To the men inside the valley, it felt like fire with no beginning, no warning, no direction. German doctrine was built around prediction. They expected artillery first, then air support, then armored assault. But this attack skipped the sequence entirely. There was no build-up, no time to disperse, no visible enemy to target. Even experienced officers froze, waiting for the real attack that never came. By the time they realized what was happening, a broken bar, the heat was already lethal. Fear is more powerful than any bomb. As heat spread, radios became useless. Men screamed over each other. Orders contradicted each other. Some units tried to retreat. Others stayed put, believing it would pass. Nothing worked. Firestorms do not respect rank. German soldiers were trained to fight under pressure. But this was different. You cannot shoot fire. You cannot flank heat. You cannot charge something you cannot see. Tank crews abandoned vehicles they loved. Officers dropped pistols they had carried for years. In those moments, survival replaced duty. And survival failed. Later that night, alone in his quarters, the general sat staring at a map. Red pens marked positions that no longer existed. Entire companies erased. He whispered to himself, "Greater than we planned for everything, a broken bar except this." For the first time in his career, he understood. Experience could become useless overnight. Instead of adapting, German command did what it often did late in the war. They blamed individuals. The general was quietly removed, not executed, not honored, simply erased from command. Official reports labeled the disaster as greater than unexpected enemy fire concentration. No mention of innovation. No mention of failure to adapt. The truth was buried. On the Allied side, analysts studied the results carefully. The conclusion was chilling. A division had been neutralized in under 20 minutes, with minimal Allied losses. This was not just a tactical success, it was a psychological breakthrough. If soldiers believed they could be destroyed without seeing the enemy a broken bar, they would break faster next time. From that day forward, War changed. Armor no longer guaranteed safety. Cover no longer meant protection. Experience no longer promised survival. The battlefield itself had become a weapon. Most of the soldiers who died that day were never named in history books. They left behind letters never sent, families never reunited, stories never told. They were not defeated by courage or cowardice. They were defeated by change. The general would live the rest of his life in silence. No memoirs, no interviews, but those who knew him said he repeated one sentence often: greater than the most dangerous weapon is the one you don't recognize. By morning, the valley no longer looked like a battlefield. There were no advancing lines, no moving columns, no sounds of combat, only ruins. The ground was blackened, metal lay twisted like melted wax. The air still carried heat, as if the land itself remembered what had happened. The 16th Panzer Division had ceased to exist, not after weeks of fighting, not after heroic resistance, but in less than 20 minutes. German recovery units arrived cautiously. They expected unexploded shells. They expected enemy ambushes. They found neither. What they found was worse. Tanks fused into the ground, weapons warped beyond recognition, bodies with no visible wounds, yet completely burned. Medics struggled to classify the casualties. These were not normal battlefield injuries. There were no patterns to measure. It was as if the rules of war had been rewritten overnight. Detailed reports were sent to German high command. They described extreme heat without sustained explosions, rapid collapse of morale, total loss of command control, inability to identify the attacking force. Some officers warned, greater than this represents a new category of warfare. Those reports were quietly filed away. Germany did not have time or resources to rethink war. The front lines were already collapsing elsewhere. Even soldiers who never entered that valley were affected. Rumors spread fast. Stories of men burning without seeing the enemy. Stories of tanks turning into ovens. Stories of entire units erased by nothing. Fear does not need proof. By late 1943, German units began abandoning enclosed terrain, valleys, cities, industrial zones, anywhere fire could be trapped. The invisible weapon had reshaped behavior without firing another shot. Allied commanders reviewed aerial reconnaissance photographs. Before, a full German armor division. After, scorched earth. The conclusion was undeniable. This method of warfare worked, but it came with a heavy moral weight. One officer reportedly said, "Greater than we didn't defeat an army, we erased it." Still, the war demanded results, and results mattered more than questions. What happened to the 16th Panzer Division was no accident. It marked the shift from tactical warfare to environmental warfare. Instead of fighting soldiers directly, the Allies learned to weaponize terrain, air pressure, heat, oxygen. The battlefield itself became the killer. This concept would later appear in urban firebombing, strategic air raids, area denial weapons. The valley was only the beginning. The German general survived the war, but his name vanished from official history. No medals, no rehabilitation, no acknowledgement. He was remembered only as the man who lost a division. Those close to him knew the truth. He had not been defeated by incompetence. He had been defeated by time. War had moved forward without him. Decades after the war, a letter was found in an archive, written by a young Panzer crewman. It read, "Greater than there was no warning, greater than no enemy to fight, greater than just heat, a broken bar everywhere, greater than if this is the future of war, greater than then war has become something else entirely." The letter was never sent. The soldier never returned. Modern military academies study incidents like this one, not for tactics, but for lessons. The lesson is simple and terrifying. Technology changes faster than doctrine. Armies that fail to adopt do not lose battles, they disappear. Today's weapons no longer rely on visible enemies. Drones strike from unseen distances. Missiles hit without warning. Cyber attacks disable armies before fighting begins. The invisible fire never went away. It evolved. The men in that valley were among the first to face it. History often celebrates heroism, but sometimes history is shaped by moments of helplessness. Moments when courage is useless, when experience fails, when survival depends on knowledge and not bravery. The destruction of the 16th Panzer Division was one of those moments. The general reportedly said this near the end of his life. "Greater than we thought war was about strength. greater than it wasn't. Greater than it was about understanding what comes next. He was right.